it's Jo from Minerva. Welcome to our sew along on the Atelier Jupe Elle Jumpsuit. It is a jumpsuit with pockets, an elasticated waist, darts and a little slit on the back with a button so you can get it on and off. And today I'm using Atelier Jupe fabric as well, but you could use any viscose, something with drape, so tencel would work, or modal, or a very light cotton lawn if you don't mind the sleeves not draping quite down, but you would get a nice summer outfit if you tried it in a cotton lawn. The one that I'm using today is this beautiful spring print by Atelier Jupe. It is a viscose and it's got beautiful drape, so when I get a gathered waist, I'm not going to get extra inches around my hips and waist. It's got trees on, flowers, but really any viscose would work for this pattern. So if you look at the fabric quantities on the product list below, you can swap in and out a fabric that would work for you in terms of pattern. Viscose does shrink a little bit, so you definitely need to pre-wash your fabric before you start cutting. And the other thing to make sure before you start cutting is that you ensure that, because this is a directional print, that you put all your pattern pieces on going in the one direction. So you don't want trees upside down on one leg and not on the other. Well, not on either actually, but you need to make sure that if you've got a directional print that you chose for your viscose, then you make sure that your pattern pieces are all following. Now, sometimes I do pattern matching. It's enjoyable, it's a intricate sewing process, but quite often I don't go for full pattern matching. I go for pattern balancing, and I think sometimes that's as important as pattern matching. And you can go for making sure that you don't have two trees on top of each other, that you have a tree here and a tree in the middle, or that you have the end of a tree and then the start of a next tree. So it's more about a balance of pattern images, I think, more than just pattern matching everything. If you pattern match everything, you're going to need to buy a lot more extra fabric. Also, this fabric has quite a stretch in the width there for a viscose. It's nice for jumpsuits when you're sitting down at work or in the car, or bending down to put the dog lead on. You've got a little bit of stretch there, but not in the other direction. So you can see the print is telling me which way to have the cross grain going across my waist, across my bottom, across the bust. So just a few things to check out once you've chosen your fabric, that you're working with it, not against it. You will also get the elastic that comes in the kit below, and also a very light iron-on interfacing. And if you're using something fluid like a viscose, then you need to make sure that your neckline, this one's got a V neckline, holds its shape well, but it's not stiff and fighting against the drape of the fabric. So this very light interfacing is included in the kit as well. Let's take a look at the pattern. It's by Atelier Jupe. It is called the Elle Jumpsuit. It's a bit difficult to see it there with the busy image, but this is the style here. It's got a dropped sleeve, elasticated waist and pockets, and inside the pattern you will get a pattern booklet. The first part's in Dutch, the second part's in French, and the bit that I used was in English, and it's very comprehensive, especially on the sizing. So make sure you measure yourself and find your size. It does have UK sizes on it. I came out of 14, which is about right for me, but the waist did tip over into 16. So I might need to make sure that I allow a larger piece of elastic for the waist. It also gives you the finished measurements. So if you try and measure it up against something that you've already got that's well fitting, you'll get a good idea of the ease. It gives you the fabric requirements, the pattern layouts, and then it gives you a list of all the pieces, and it tells you how many of each piece that you will need. It gives you a few tips on tracing the patterns off, because remember, this pattern you need to trace off the piece because the pattern sheet is overlapped. And then these are the sewing instructions, really clear, simple diagrams. The instructions are well written, and there is the front bodice, the back bodice, the trousers piece, and then putting the two pieces together and then adding the cuffs. So an intermediate will be able to sew it. After a sew along, maybe a beginner will be able to have a good crack at it. So let's have a look what else is inside the pattern envelope. Beautiful packaging. So you open up the packet and there's a little card that tells you all the seam allowances are included, so that's good. And you just get this one pattern sheet. And the one pattern sheet has all of the pieces on, and you need to trace them off. So I find it quite useful to go over the size that I want with a coloured pen or a highlighter pen, sometimes I use. Then when I put my tracing paper on top, I can see, especially on these curved edges, I can see that I'm following the right line as I turn a corner. To trace the pattern pieces, I used Swedish pattern paper. This is a little piece. It doesn't rip as easily as tissue. It's very see-through and it's quite pliable. So if you did some fitting with the paper pieces, if you wanted to match the paper piece up and pin it together, it doesn't fall apart or rip so easily as tissue paper. And you can see how easy it is to see the pattern piece through, especially because that one line that I've drawn I did with green colouring pencil so that I could make sure I was following a size 42. Swedish pattern paper comes on a roll and it lasts for ages and ages and ages, and it's really worth the investment because you can try using baking paper and greaseproof paper and it all curls up, and then you stick it with sellotape and then it's not sticky. And actually, if you're going to go to the trouble of tracing off a pattern, it's probably because you want to trace off a different size another time. So then you would only have to go through the whole process again. So invest in a little roll of Swedish pattern paper and it will last you for ages and ages and ages. After you've traced off your pattern pieces, you need to make sure that you put on all of the markings. So you'll need the grain line, and you will also need to put on any of the markings. So for example, this is the leg cuffs that go on the bottom of the ankles, and there's a fold line along the middle, so I've made sure that I've added that. So the rest of the leg pieces are a back cuff and a front cuff, a back waistband, a front waistband. There are the back trousers. This piece has to be joined, but you need to make sure you get the grain line on. There are the pocket pieces and the front pieces. Then there is the back body, which is in 2 pieces, and the front bodice, which is in 1 piece. And then there are your 2 facings, which require interfacing. So this is for the front neckline, and this has been interfaced, and you can see still how fluid that is, even though it's been interfaced, and that's important. You've also got some back pieces which I've interfaced. Now, when I did the interfacing, I roughly cut out the interfacing and I put on the piece, and then I put a press cloth on top, and then I ironed it all. Then I peeled it off, and then I turned it over onto the press cloth and pressed with the press cloth. That means that now, because the viscose is so slippy, I can trim away the remainder of the interfacing, but it's very difficult to get a piece of interfacing and your facing piece stuck down without it twisting or moving. So this way it's all stuck down and then it's easier to cut after that. So that's a little tip for interfacing your pieces. Try and do all of this interfacing and marking at the beginning before you start sewing, because once you start sewing you want to sort of carry on with the momentum of the pattern rather than having to stop and do different parts and get out different pieces of equipment, and it also saves quite a lot of time. I cut this whole jumpsuit out with a mixture of a rotary cutter and scissors. The scissors I used for some of the smaller parts, and because the fabric is very slippy, I used some pattern weights to hold it down. I put the paper pieces on top, and then I cut with a rotary cutter because it was just easier to have it all weighted down than to have it flopping and moving around. The other thing that I did, which I started doing lots more, is to put the dart markings on. I use some dressmaker's carbon paper and a serrated wheel. It's a blunt wheel and it makes little dots through. So because the viscose is so slippy, I don't want to be flapping up the pattern and getting a general dart line. So between the two pieces of fabric, because it's on the fold, I put carbon paper in, then I mark the dart, and that's marked it on the one side, and then I put it in the other way, and that marks it on the other side, and then I should have, it's difficult to see, I've got my dart line now marked in yellow in tiny little dots. So I haven't got to do lots of tailor's tacks. I haven't got to jiggle around with a ruler on a slippy fabric. That just marks it straight through. And then there's one on the other side here. So my darts are on the reverse and ready to sew. I've also overlocked around the edge of the whole of the pieces. If you've got an overlocker, it does mean that while you're handling, it's not fraying. It does fray a little bit, but not massively. Viscose generally doesn't fray too much. And then I've got the opportunity to keep sewing and keep moving with the pattern. If you haven't got an overlocker, you can just zigzag all around the edges, or you can also cut with pinking shears. Now that all the markings are transferred and overlocking's done, then all the preparation is complete, and it's probably a good idea to set aside that as one task, as that is your sewing of that session, is to prepare it all and then to come back to it and actually sew, and I think you'll get much more of an enjoyable sew from it. So the first part is to put the darts in the bust, and of course we've already marked those. Darts go from the outside to the bust apex, so you will forwards and backwards at the beginning, and then towards the end you need a couple of air stitches, so make sure you gradually go off the end, and when you get to the end you need just an air stitch on the end, which is a stitch that's just off the end of the fabric. And if you've got an air stitch, then you can tie off the end without pulling the last stitch into a little pucker. So tie that off. And then your dart will go very smoothly to the point where you can't even see it. You need to press that dart down and do the same on both sides. Next stage on the pattern, item 2, is to prepare the back seam. So these are the 2 back pieces. They are right sides together. And there was a pattern marking here where you stop sewing, so this bit remains open. So up to the neckline remains open. That's the slit in the back that will help you to get it on and off. And then from that marking about halfway down to the hem is where you're going to sew. I put a little tip for you. If I need to stop somewhere halfway along, I put in 2 pins to tie. It's like a bit like tying a knot in your pajamas. It tells me, oh, stop a minute. And here is where I'm going to stop for the slit. I use it when I'm sewing very long belts or something and I need to leave a turnout space. I make sure that I put 2 pins at the beginning and 2 pins at the end so I know when to stop. That needs to be pressed open once it's sewn, and then we've prepared the front and the back piece. Here's an example now of what I was talking about with pattern balancing. So I haven't pattern matched this seam, but you can, in viscose, once it's pressed, the seam is here along this pink flowers here, white flowers here. But you can hardly see it. As long as you've got a balance of, there's a whole tree here and there's a whole tree here. I picked quite a busy bit of fabric pattern print here so that I didn't have to pattern match the seam, but it was not obvious or jarring. Stage 3 is to join the front and back pieces together. So I'm going to go along the shoulder seams. They've got a slight curve in, which you want to keep because that's part of the sleeve shape. And we're going to sew down the side seams and clip them and press them out, and then put this piece aside. Okay, so that's your top done. Looks big, but it's all going to be gathered in and with the trouser waistband, and then you'll get that nice sort of blousey finish on the top, and you need it to be quite roomy and with some ease so that you can take it on and off. Just make sure you clip the sleeve there, not too much, just enough to kink that round. God, I love these scissors. I didn't used to have machine scissors. I just used to cut everything with the big scissors, my dressmaking scissors, but then a couple of times I cut holes in things because you're putting them up and down, bang, bang, bang. Then my scissors were getting a bit unbalanced for cutting. Little machine scissors have been an eye-opener for me, an absolute game changer. Number 4 is to turn the sleeve under by 1 centimetre and stitch all the way around, and then you can give all of the top a final press. Those shoulder seams need to be open before you put your seam line down, and then that will be your top finished. I've overlocked my neckline, as I mentioned before, but if you're not overlocking, then you might want to stay stitch this because it's cut on the bias and it's got a slight stretch in it, and you don't want that to stretch out, otherwise when you come to put the facing on, the facing won't fit. So you might need to just do a single line of machine stitching within the seam allowance just to stop that stretching out while you're working. Step 5 is to join the facings together. So here's the V, and then you're going to join the 2 shoulder seams, and then you'll have the facings for the back slit. Make sure you keep the shoulder seams at the right seam allowance so that the distance between the shoulder and the V is correct for the shape of your top. Press those out and then they're ready to apply. Apply the interfacing to the top, right sides together. Pin the main points first, so I've pinned the front V because I want that to be a nice accurate place where it's lying well, and I'm pinning the shoulder seams and I'm pinning the seam allowances open, and I've put 2 pins in there, one to hold the seam allowances in the right places, and I'm going to carry on pinning all the way around. It is quite stretchy, this fabric, so be careful you don't overstretch it out, but you do have the opportunity to ease it slightly along that front edge, and then it's time to sew the facing onto the neckline. You sew from the back corner round the back neck, round the V, and then around to the back neck, but not down the slit. Now you want to give your neckline the best chance of looking brilliant, so I have done a double row of stitching just on the V. So you can see I've gone from here to here. I've just over sewn that because I don't want it to pull out, and then I've snipped it as close to the stitch line as I can, and because it's a viscose I'm just going to put a little bit of fray stop on there. I'm going to just take that around that edge of where I've just snipped, a little bit on there as well, and when that's dry that will just stop that fraying through the stitches and making a little fluffy fray mark on the front. Fray stop does work, it really does stop that fabric from fraying anymore. Now we're going to understitch. It doesn't use the word understitch in the pattern, but that's what it is. I'm just going to release some other tighter curves and tighter areas. And because I kept these seam allowances nice and flat, I'm going to take some of that out. Like this. And then I'm going to press all of the seam allowances towards the facing. So from the right side, all of the seam allowances will be going up towards the facing. And then I'm going to stitch through the facing and all the seam allowance, all the chunky side. So what you're left with is this floaty side on its own, and the facing with a little line of stitching 2mm from the edge. Okay, now it's time to work on the back facing. So you're going to turn the facing so that the right sides are together, and then you're going to sew down to the marking, and you should have your back facing attached at the bottom by a couple of centimetres, and you're going to pin that in place and the other slit in place. And you also need to put somewhere either a little piece of elastic or a little piece of ribbon within there near the neck edge as your button closure. So make sure you put that in now because you don't want to have to unpick later. So you're going to put a little piece of ribbon in there. It's not sticking out that way, it's sticking down towards the top so that when you turn it right side out, your little button loop will arrive on the outside. You can use a little piece of elastic, you can use a little elastic hairbands are quite good, the fine ones, the black ones, or just a little piece of ribbon, or a piece of ribbon off the hanging ribbons works quite well as well. So that's the next step. We're going to finish the back slit by turning the facings to the right side. Front's made, got the facing line on the front, got the dart that you've made, you've turned the sleeves, pressed the seams out, then you should have this on the back. It was tricky there underneath, but if you follow the instructions it works. And I've got a little button ribbon on the top. Don't know if I'm going to put a press stud or a button yet, but it's there ready. And so the top is all finished, and it's time to start constructing the waistband. I'm going to put a back waistband with a front waistband, and you're going to do that twice. And you're going to stitch the ends closed with the 1.5 seam allowance, and you can finish those with a zigzag or an overlocker as well. And then we're going to attach one to the bodice, and I'll show you how that happens. Because of all the instructions, this one is quite complicated, I think, and there's not so many instructions on the sheet. You also need to make sure that you've got your patterns going. I'm just going to check the tree trunks, so they're all going in the right direction. I need to make sure that when I attach them that I put the pattern going the right way, so I don't have a waistband that's upside down. Next, you attach the waistband right sides together with your top. I'm just making sure that the trees are the right way up, and the shorter piece goes at the back and the longer piece belongs on the front. So make sure you've got those few things in place. Pin at the sides and then even out the fabric along the waistband. You've got a little bit of stretch there. You shouldn't need it if you've got the right seam allowances, but you should be able to get it quite even. And then you're going to sew that on, and then get ready to apply the other waistband after you've attached this one. The inner waistband works like this. So you've got a waistband attached to right sides together to your outer garment, and then you're going to put your second waistband right side to wrong side of bodice and make a little sandwich. So you should have a waistband outer, then your bodice as the sandwich in the middle, and then your waistband inner on the other side. And then you need to make sure that you pin it from the side that has the stitching line on, because you're going to follow that stitching line to attach the inner waistband. Once you've attached the two waistbands, you should have two that hang down, so one on the outer and one hanging down on the inner, but you've got your 1.5 seam allowance inside, and we need to trim that away. So that's where my little trusty machine scissors come in. Don't cut any bits you shouldn't be cutting. Use your fingers to feel underneath. I'm going to cut away just to a 0.5 seam allowance all the way around. And then you're going to go over to the ironing board, your ironing surface, and on the inner waistband you're going to press up 1 centimetre, and you need to make sure that's accurate because you're going to stitch there soon. So you need to use a seam gauge or an ironing gauge to make sure that you've got that 1.5 seam allowance. To start working on the trousers, you start with the front pieces. There is a teeny weeny pleat in the front. So I've made one here so you can see the pleat is here. The pleat goes away from the crotch, so it's going that way. So when you look at your trouser front, you should have the opening for your pleat on the hip side and the fold of your pleat on the crotch side. You just sew across the end of there within the seam allowance to hold it in place so that you can take the pins out. Just a little bit, that's all it needs, just enough to hold it in place. And then we can start looking at the hip side here, where we're going to put our hip pocket. So this is your front trouser piece with a little pleating, and you're going to find the angled edge of your pocket and pin it to the angled edge of your trouser. There's a little mark here off the pattern, and that's where I'm going to stitch to. So I'm going to stitch to here and stop. It's within the 1.5 seam allowance. Then I'm going to press the seam allowance away from the edge of the pocket, and I'm going to understitch along here like we did on the neck facing. Let me show you each of those parts. So 1.5 seam allowance, so the angled pocket edge. Once you've sewn that seam, you're then going to press all of the seam allowances towards the pocket, then understitch. So you've got all of the seam allowance going towards the pocket, and I'm going to stitch on the pocket side 2 mil from the edges. Down to the same place as before. So now my pocket folds over really neatly, and I'm going to press that pocket edge, which now looks perfect, and then underneath is the understitching. Now to make the pocket, you've got a marking here and here, and we're going to bring those two together, and the ends of your pocket, the bottom of your pocket should match up. And you will see that a marking on the side of your pocket will match with the other side. And then you're going to sew across the end of your pocket. It's all very little small stages, but they all make up the pocket bag. So now you've got the crotch here, the pocket attached here, and then your pocket is going to find another notch. So you've got a blue one here, well mine's blue, and it's going to match a blue notch here, which is just inside the pleat. I'm going to pin there. And you've got another notch here, and that matches up with the edge of your pocket. So I'm happy with that. I'm going to pin that one there. And then I should have some ones on the side seam here, allowing me to match all of the side of the pocket. So from the back, it's a square pocket with a pleat, and from the front, it's the pocket opening with a little bit of fabric spare here to do my side seam when I make my trousers. Then you can give it all a final press. To hold all of those in place, I'm just going to sew 1/2 centimetre in the seam allowance. Time to start putting the trouser section together. So you sew the side seams first. So you put a front, and you know it's the front because it's got the pocket on, onto a back leg. You can see that's got a slightly bigger crotch line. And you sew the side seams on both sides. And then you sew the inside leg seam, the inseam, and then I will show you how to put the crotch seam in together. Once you've made the 2 trouser legs, to attach them together, you have one inside out, one right side out, and I'm going to put the one leg inside the other leg and match the crotch with a pin, and you need to make sure the front is with the front now and the back is with the back. They're back to being partners. And then you bring together the 2 back crotch lines and the 2 front crotch lines, that's the ones with the pockets on, and sew that whole arc shape. So you will have now got to the point where you've got a rather comical pair of huge trousers, but now you're going to put the waistband onto these trousers with the bodice attached. So you're going to put the bodice right sides together inside the trousers, and then you'll have the waistband inner flapping around. So I'm going to show you what that looks like all pinned together. So rather than me flapping a jumpsuit at you, I've pinned it in place so that you can see it. So this is the trousers, and then inside it I've dropped the bodice with the right sides together, and then I've pinned all the way around the waist. So inside you've got the bodice, you can see the back seam there, look, and then you've got the waistband inner flapping, and you know it's the inner because you pressed up 1 centimetre, and then there is the waist that we've just pinned. So now we're going to sew all the way around the waist to attach everything together. Okay, to finish the waistband, you're going to pin down that ironed and pressed edge, and it needs to go just below the waistband on the outside because you're going to stitch in the ditch there. So if it doesn't quite meet the waistband, you'll miss to stitch it, and if it hangs down too low, you'll miss the fold that you pressed. Now it's quite critical on mine. I must have got quite close to the seam allowances, so I've tacked all mine down so that I can be feeling for the fabric as I'm sewing rather than trying to pull pins out at the same time. You need to sew the stitch in the ditch from the right side so that you can see what you're doing, and you can check that you're getting close enough. And of course you will have left a gap for threading your elastic. You're going to feel underneath. You're going to feel underneath with your fingers to check that you're catching the fabric underneath. In my case, I can also see the tacking as well. The final thing I like to do to finish off the waistband is to just distribute the elastic, and then especially because this will be taken on and off and on and off, I don't want the elastic to twist, so I'm just going to sew through the elastic on the waist, but you need to make sure you've got the elastic spread out evenly. If you've got a really good thread match, you can just sew on each side, and you can't see it on the outer, but it's just stopping the elastic from rolling round. When I tried it on, I was really glad that I'd done that extra bit of preparation around the V, because to get it on and off, I was pulling it down my shoulders and I was opening that V up there. So I'm glad I've used the fray stop and given it a little bit more strength. Final stages of the pattern are to achieve a leg cuff. That's here, and I've tried this on with the one leg cuff, and it does come up quite short, and I am quite short. So I'm 5'3" or 4. So I would say you want to make sure that you've measured the hem to crotch length when you're cutting out the pattern. So this is fine for me, but really that's going to be quite ankle skimming for anybody taller than me. So make sure that you've got the right leg length, because obviously once you've cut the length, you can't add to that now particularly, and you need to make sure that you've got the right proportion of the leg. This is what we're trying to achieve. It is a leg cuff. You see it sometimes on an armband cuff, like on the Tilly and the Buttons Stevie dress. You see this technique on the bottom of paper bag shorts. You see it. The first thing you need to do is to sew the short ends of your cuff pieces. You need to make sure you've got a cuff front with a cuff back. You fold it in half along that dotted line that was on the pattern piece and press it. And now this goes right sides together over the leg. So the shorter side is the front of the leg. So we're going to make sure the shorter side of the leg cuff is there. So you've got the short length of the front with the shorter cuff piece. You'll know because the seams will match up. If you've used the right seam allowance, you will get a good fit on here. And then you're going to match the notches and attach the leg cuff with a 1.5 seam allowance. Once the leg cuff is attached, you then need to finish the seam, and then we're going to press all the seam allowance on the inside up towards the trouser. So you give that a press. I'm using a sleeve board because it's just helping me to get around the small circumference. But I'm pushing the seam allowance up towards the trouser so that all I've got left dangling at the bottom is the cuff. And now I'm going to turn up the cuff just, so there's my, I'm trying to show you on a white bit, there's my seam line there, and I'm going to turn it up and press it again. And then on each side where the seams are, going to do a stitch in the ditch, and that will hold each side. So here's my one that I've done, and that one is attached in the down the middle. If you feel you need to put another stitch in, you can put a little hand stitch in if you're got quite a drapey viscose and it's flopping forward, but it depends what it feels like when you've got it on. Start with the side seams and see how much you need to attach. And there you are, finished. Time for a final press, and I'm going to go and hunt out my favourite shoes. I hope you enjoyed that sew along. If you would like to have an explore of any other Atelier Jupe patterns, you can search those. If you search on patterns and then look for this designer, you'll find their full range. They're quite classic clothes, things that you would wear for a long time. Don't forget you'll need to order tracing paper, but all the products that I've used today are listed below. If you hover over them, the whole range will go into your shopping basket and then you can delete as necessary. So if you're swapping out the fabric for a different fabric design, you can see how many meters there are in the shopping basket. Of course, if you click on Atelier Jupe pattern for the Elle jumpsuit, you'll see other people who've made the jumpsuit, and you will see what sort of fabrics they've chosen and how they've tackled the pattern. If you've got any questions, put those below and we can try and answer them for you, because we'd love to help you along in your sewing journey. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoy making a jumpsuit. Don't forget to post your makes on Minerva so that we can see what you've been making. Bye.